The air inside the monastery grew heavier with each passing hour, thickening like a fog that seeped not only into the lungs, but into the very marrow of the bones. Marcus Hale felt it first in his chest, a tightening that no rational explanation could allay. Around him, the ancient stone walls of the monastery seemed less inert and more alive, throbbing with a pulse that echoed in time with the haunting chants that filled the air. "You feel it too, don't you?" Elena's voice was barely above a whisper, her eyes wide and shimmering with an intensity Marcus had never seen before. She stood close to him in the dim light of the main chamber, the flickering flames from their lantern casting dancing shadows that twisted grotesquely along the carved reliefs. Marcus shook his head, a frown deepening on his face. "I hear it, yes, but the walls don't pulse. That's just your mind playing tricks." Elena's lips pressed into a thin line. "You're resisting what's right in front of you. The choir isn't just sound, it's presence, a force." He wanted to argue, to cling to the sturdy frameworks of logic and evidence that had defined his career and his life. Yet, as the chanting swelled, enveloping them in a tapestry of ethereal harmonies and dissonant cries, he found his defenses weakening. Across the hall, Dre. Sylvia Klein adjusted her recording devices with frantic urgency. Her usually composed demeanor was unraveling. "These frequencies," she muttered, eyes darting between the monitors, "they're impossible. No human voice can produce this range, this layering. It's like the sound itself is bending physics." Marcus glanced over, feeling a flicker of unease. Sylvia's skepticism had always been a bulwark for the team, but here, even her scientific tools faltered. Could it be interference? Equipment malfunction? She shook her head, her fingers trembling slightly. "No. I've tested everything, this is real." Elena stepped closer to Marcus, her gaze fixed on the relics embedded in the stone walls, ancient chalices, cracked icons, and faded tapestries that seemed to shimmer faintly in the lantern light. "This monastery is a vessel," she said softly. "The Choa's voices are trapped here, yes, but also bound to these objects. They're conduits of the pact, echoes of the souls that made it." Marcus swallowed hard. "A pact? You mean the ritual the manuscripts mentioned?" Elena nodded, eyes glistening. "The monks sacrificed their bodies to transcend mortality. Their voices became immortal, but at a terrible cost." The chanting swelled again, the voices weaving between angelic purity and guttural menace. It was as if the stones themselves sang, sometimes welcoming, sometimes threatening. Suddenly, a cold draft swept the chamber. Lantern flames flickered and dimmed, and a chill unlike any winter's breath washed over the group. From the swirling shadows stepped a figure, thin, robed, almost translucent. Father Ambrose. Marcus's breath caught. The abbot's ghostly apparition held, his hollow eyes locked on Marcus's, communicating without words a desperate warning. The Choa's embrace was nearing completion. Elena stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "We have to decide what this means. To accept the Choa's reality is to accept the danger it brings." Marcus clenched his fists, the last vestiges of his skepticism battling with the undeniable evidence. There has to be a way out. There has to be a rational explanation. Just as Sylvia's voice cut through the tension. "If the Choa is manipulating sound waves and perception, maybe we can find a frequency to disrupt it." Elena shook her head. "It's not just sound, it's faith twisted into a prison." As the team argued, the Choa's voices grew louder, still, swirling around them in a dizzying dance of beauty and horror. The monastery seemed to exhale, its cold breath seeping into their very souls. Marcus looked around at the faces of his team, some terrified, some fascinated, all changed. The inescapable chorus was no longer just a mystery to be solved. It was a force that would demand everything they had, and perhaps more. "We're running out of time," Marcus said, voice tight. "Whatever this choir is, it's not just singing anymore. It's coming for us." Elena nodded, eyes reflecting both fear and something deeper, acceptance. "Then we must prepare." The haunting echoes of the choir filled the chamber, a relentless symphony of corrupted faith and frozen fear that promised no escape. And somewhere deep within the monastery's heart, The hollow choir waited. The flickering torchlight cast long, wavering shadows on the cold stone walls as the expedition team made their way down the narrow, spiraling staircase that led beneath the monastery. The air grew heavier with each step, thickening into a palpable weight that seemed to press into their lungs and slow their breathing. The faint echo of chanting swelled around them, no longer distant but enveloping, as if the very stones themselves sang the hollow hymn. Dedre. Marcus Hale led the way, his sharp eyes scanning the worn inscriptions that marred the ancient walls. These markings, he murmured, tracing the fading lines with a gloved finger. They're older than anything we've seen so far. Elena Voss followed closely, her gaze softened yet intense. She breathed deeply, as if trying to draw the song into her very soul. The chant, she whispered, it's alive here. Not just sound, but presence. Jonas Reed grunted, his usual scowl deepening. Presence or not, it's messing with our heads. I don't like this place. Lena Moritz bent over a crumbling manuscript, her fingers trembling slightly as she deciphered the archaic script. It speaks of a ritual, she said, voice quivering with both excitement and dread. A binding, a sacrifice. The monks surrendered their bodies to transcendence, but it was a pact with something dark. The choir, their voices trapped between worlds. Marcus swallowed hard, the words stirring a cold fear deep within. So they were still here, he said quietly. Not in flesh, but in song. Prisoners of their own faith. The group entered a vast chamber carved from the living rock. The walls etched with grotesque symbols and faded frescoes depicting angelic figures twisted in agony. A stone altar stood at the center, stained dark with the passage of centuries. The chanting crescendoed into a chorus that seemed to emanate from the very air itself, surrounding them, pressing in. Elena approached the altar, her lips parting as she began to hum softly, matching the eerie melody that filled the chamber. Her eyes closed, and for a moment, the team saw a transformation, a serene acceptance flickering across her face. Marcus watched, torn between fascination and terror. Elena, be careful, he cautioned, voice low. This place, it's not just memories, it's a trap. Jonas shuffled uneasily, clutching his recording device. I don't believe in curses, he said, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. But this is something else. Suddenly, a cold gust swept through the chamber. From the shadows near the entrance, a figure emerged, Father Ambrose. His wraith-like form glided silently forward, hollow eyes locking with Marcus's. The apparition raised a hand in a slow, deliberate motion, a gesture that spoke of warning and despair. No words escaped the ghostly lips, but the message was clear. The pack's price was eternal, and the choir's reach was inexorable. The team recoiled, the oppressive weight of the chamber pressing down on their minds and spirits. Marcus's journal lay open in his hands, but the pen trembled as he struggled to record the truth of what they had uncovered. Faith, he realized bitterly, had become their prison. As the chanting swelled once more, the line between devotion and madness blurred irrevocably. The explorers stood at the precipice, caught between the echoes of damned souls and the fragile hope of escape. The dark pact that had ensnared the monks now threatened to consume them all. A distant howl echoed through the monastery's ancient halls, a reminder that the hollow choir waited patiently, eternally singing its frozen lament. And deep below, where the shadows breathed and whispered, the choir's song grew louder still. The explorers had taken a step too far into the depths of devotion, and the price was only beginning to reveal itself. The monastery's cold was no longer merely a biting chill carried by alpine winds. It was a living, breathing entity that crept beneath the explorers' layers and settled deep within their bones. As the team stepped further into the great hall, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow, and frost, a palpable shift, gripped the air. Their breaths emerged in crystalline clouds, delicate and fleeting, yet the frost that laced the ancient stone walls seemed eternal, untouched by time's usual thaw. Dra. Marcus Hale tightened his coat collar, his sharp eyes scanning the dim expanse. It's beyond any normal cold, he muttered, his voice betraying a flicker of unease. His usual confidence felt brittle here, shattered by the hostile atmosphere and the relentless chanting that echoed from unseen corners. That chanting elusive, disembodied wove through the frigid air like spectral threads, sometimes soaring in angelic harmony, other times descending into grotesque contortions of sound that gnawed at the edges of sanity. Elena Voss stood silently near the frost-encrusted altar, her dark hair catching the faint, spectral light. Her eyes were closed, lips parted as she softly hummed to the choir's ethereal cadence. The faint vibration of her voice seemed to tether her to the intangible melodies, drawing her into a communion that was as terrifying as it was beautiful. Marcus watched her, torn between his ingrained skepticism and a reluctant fascination he could not name. "Elena," he called gently, stepping closer. "You feel it too, don't you? The presence." She opened her eyes slowly, the expression on her face a fragile blend of reverence and fear. "It's more than presence, Marcus. It's a call of frozen lament that binds us all. I think the choir, they want us to join their song." Jonas Reed shifted uneasily nearby, his breath ragged as he pulled his jacket tighter. The cold seemed to grip his limbs, freezing his movements in place. "Enough of this spiritual nonsense," he snapped, his voice rough. "We were scientists and explorers, not ghost hunters. This place is playing tricks on your mind." But even as he spoke, the choir's voices twisted into cruel laughter, echoing mockingly through the vast hall. Jonas's scowl deepened, but the paralysis in his limbs betrayed the terror clawing beneath his cynicism. He took a step forward, then another, then suddenly stumbled, the cold sapping his strength with cruel efficiency. "Dra." Sylvia Klein crouched near a shattered pillar, her glasses fogged with her own breath. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted her recording devices, eyes flicking rapidly between the instruments and the swirling mists of sound. The acoustic frequencies. "They were unlike anything I've ever encountered," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "The choir's voices. They're redistorting, warping in ways that defy physics." The others gathered around her, drawn by the dissonant symphony that played through the speakers. The choir's tones oscillated wildly from hauntingly beautiful areas that stirred an inexplicable yearning to guttural, monstrous howls that sent shivers racing down their spines. Marcus opened his notebook, hands unsteady as he scribbled observations. His rational mind fought to decode the impossible phenomena, but with each passing moment, his certainty frayed. The cold was no longer just an environmental hazard. It was a supernatural force, entwined with the choir's eternal song, freezing not only the air, but the very souls of all who dared intrude. "We can't linger here," Marcus finally said, voice low and urgent. "This place, it's alive with something ancient and malevolent. Our presence only seems to feed it." Elena's gaze lingered on the altar, where frost crystals glittered like shattered glass. "But if we flee now, what becomes of those voices? Of the souls trapped in that choir? We survive," Jonas growled, struggling to regain composure. "That's all that matters." Yet survival felt like a distant hope as the cold deepened, a tangible shroud wrapping tighter with every breath. Frozen fear settled like a stone in their chests, rooting them in place even as the choir's voices beckoned and threatened in equal measure. As night fell outside and shadows lengthened within, the monastery transformed into a living nightmare of ice and sound. The explorers found themselves caught between awe and terror, their rational defenses melting away beneath the relentless weight of the frozen choir's song, a song that promised salvation, damnation, and an eternal silence that no warmth could ever break. And in the stillness, the echo of 1,000 disembodied voices whispered secrets best left unheard, chilling the soul and binding it forever in frozen fear. The chapter closed with Marcus's hand trembling over his notebook, the final words scrawled in hurried script. "We stand on the edge of reason and oblivion. How long before the cold claims us all?" Outside, the wind howled through the Alpine Pass, a mournful accompaniment to the hollow choir's endless, frozen lament. The air in the chapel grew denser, as if the very atmosphere conspired to suffocate hope. "Dra." Marcus Hale stood rigidly near the altar, his breath visible in the cold that seeped through the stone like a living thing. The chanting swelled an impossible, ethereal symphony that filled every corner, every crevice, reverberating through the frozen silence. It was no longer simply a sound, but a presence, pressing in on the explorers with tangible weight. Elena Voss stood beside him, her dark eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight that barely pierced the creeping gloom. Her lips moved softly in tune with the ghostly chant, a desperate attempt to forge a connection with the invisible choir that consumed the monastery's soul. The melody was both beautiful and grotesque, a paradox that gnawed at the edges of reason and sanity alike. Suddenly, a cold draft swept through the chapel, extinguishing the candles in a sigh of darkness. Marcus's heart hammered as he sensed movement behind him. Turning sharply, he glimpsed a figure materializing out of the shadows. Father Ambrose. The apparition was wraith-like, robed in tattered ecclesiastical garments that seemed to absorb light, his hollow eyes holding an unbearable weight of sorrow and warning. Without a word, Father Ambrose extended a skeletal hand, his fingers curling in a gesture both beckoning and forbidding. Marcus's rational mind wrestled with the impossible reality before him. But the message was clear, the choir demanded them. It sought to claim their voices, their souls, to bind them forever in its hollow embrace. Elena's humming faltered, replaced by a whisper of fear that rippled through the group. Sylvia Klein, nearby with her recording equipment, stared wide-eyed as the distorted voices warped the air around them. Her fingers trembled over the dials, attempting to capture the impossible sounds, but even science faltered here. The choir was no mere acoustic phenomenon, it was a living nightmare woven into the monastery's very bones. The temperature plummeted further, the cold biting deeper than any natural frost. Marcus clenched his jaw, the stubbornness that had carried him this far now a fragile shield against the encroaching madness. Elena's gaze met his, a silent plea passing between them, to resist, to survive, to escape the choir's clawing grasp. But the choir's song was relentless. It seeped into their thoughts, a siren's call promising transcendence or oblivion. Father Ambrose's apparition faded slowly, leaving behind a haunting silence that pressed upon their souls heavier than any sound. Trapped between spectral demand and mortal fear, the explorers faced the ultimate choice. To join the hollow choir was to lose oneself in eternal limbo, a fate worse than death. Yet to flee meant confronting the unknown horrors waiting beyond the monastery's cold walls. As the first light of dawn threatened the horizon, Marcus's voice broke the silence. "We cannot let this place claim us," he said, determination hardening his tone. "We find a way out before the choir's demand becomes our fate." Elena nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of hope and terror. Around them, the echoes of the choir whispered still, a frozen fear that would not be silenced. The monastery held its breath, waiting. And the hollow choir continued to sing. The chill in the air had grown sharper, biting deeper into the bones of the remaining expedition members. In the crumbling chapel, where fractured beams allowed shards of pale light to scatter like broken promises across the stone floor, Marcus Hale sat hunched over his worn leather journal. His fingers trembled as they traced the inked lines of his previous entries, each one a step further into the abyss that the monastery had become. Around him, the faint, disembodied chanting echoed endlessly, weaving itself into the very fabric of the cold stone. A ceaseless hymn that pressed against his mind like an invisible vice. He closed his eyes, trying to summon the rationality that had always defined him, a historian's discipline, a seeker of truths grounded in facts and evidence. But here, within these forsaken walls, facts twisted into shadows and evidence dissolved into whispers. The voices that drifted through the corridors were no longer mere sounds. They were a presence, a living entity that clawed at the edges of sanity. Marcus's breath hitched as a sudden wave of panic surged through him, cold and relentless, and for a moment, the sturdy veneer of his skepticism cracked. "Marcus." Elena's voice was soft, tentative, yet threaded with urgency. She knelt at the chapel's altar, fingers brushing the shattered remains of a once majestic statue. Her eyes, dark pools reflecting the dim light, shimmered with unshed tears. "You must hold on. We have to hold on." He looked up, meeting her gaze, searching for the calm she seemed to embody despite the growing dread that clung to them all. Elena hummed the haunting chant, a fragile tether to something beyond the cold stone and frozen fear. Her voice, barely audible, wove through the silence, an attempt to reach the spiritual core that the monastery's darkness sought to suffocate. "Hope," she whispered, "is all we have left." But even as she spoke, the walls seemed to pulse with a malevolent rhythm, the chanting rising and falling like a tide that threatened to drown their very souls. Nearby, Sylvia Klein was a stark contrast to their emotional turmoil. Surrounded by her instruments, the scientist's brow furrowed in concentration as she monitored the equipment that recorded the monastery's acoustic phenomena. Yet the numbers and waveforms on her screens defied conventional explanation, frequencies that bent and looped impossibly, sound waves that seemed to fold back upon themselves, creating an auditory labyrinth with no exit. "This can't be real," Sylvia muttered, voice tight with frustration. "These readings, they shouldn't exist. Not in any known physical environment." Her scientific skepticism, once a pillar of certainty, now wavered under the weight of the inexplicable. The instruments that were meant to anchor her in reason only deepened the enigma, blurring the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural. Suddenly, the faint flicker of ethereal light caught their attention. In the shadowed corridor beyond the chapel, the ghostly figure of Father Ambrose materialized, his wraith-like form robed in tattered vestments, hollow eyes seeming to bore into their souls. He neither spoke nor moved, but his presence was a profound statement, a silent testament to the tragic duty that bound him to this forsaken place. Marcus swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the apparition's gaze. It was a moment heavy with unspoken warnings, a reminder of the thin line they walk between salvation and eternal damnation. The apparition's sorrowful eyes seemed to plead with them, urging understanding yet offering no easy answers. The team's fractures widened. Marcus's journal entries became erratic, filled with frantic observations and growing despair. Elena's spiritual fortitude was tested daily, her quiet strength contending with the monastery's oppressive aura. Sylvia's scientific detachment frayed as the acoustic anomalies deepened, twisting the very air into a tangible threat. "We were losing ourselves," Marcus confessed one evening, voice hoarse, eyes haunted. "This place, it's not just the cold or the isolation, it's the choa. It's everything we don't understand." Elena reached out, placing a steady hand on his arm. "We must remember why we came here, to uncover, to understand, to survive. Our faith, whether in reason or spirit, is what will guide us through this darkness." But even as they clung to their beliefs, the monastery seemed to respond, its walls whispering secrets in the endless chant, drawing them further into the frozen abyss. Madness was no longer a distant threat, it was an imminent, creeping presence, stalking every shadow, echoing in every silence. The descent into madness was underway, and the fragile bonds of the expedition were the only barriers left against the Koa's insidious embrace. The air grew heavier as the expedition team descended the narrow stone staircase. Their footsteps muffled beneath the weight of silence that seemed to press against every surface. Flickering beams from their headlamps cut through the damp darkness, revealing ancient frescoes that clung to the walls like spectral memories. The images portrayed monks engaged in strange, ritualistic postures, their faces rigid with fervor, surrounded by shadowy forms that twisted unnaturally, as if the very essence of the monastery was entwined with something beyond human comprehension. Duke Marcus Hale led the way, his breath visible in the cold air. His usual stoic demeanor was shadowed by a deepening unease. Beside him, Elena Voss moved with a reverent quiet, her eyes wide as she absorbed the spectral artistry that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Jonas Reed followed, his scowl deepening with every step, the muscles in his jaw clenched as he fought the gnawing sense of dread threatening to unravel his skepticism. Above them, the hollow choir's voices rose and fell in a melody that was at once angelic and grotesque. The sound seeped from the ancient stones, weaving a tapestry of sound that wrapped around them, echoing endlessly through the crypt. It was as if the monastery itself sang, a living entity feeding on the souls trapped within its walls. Sylvia Klein crouched near a cluster of carvings etched deep into the stone floor. Her fingers traced the grooves, eyes narrowing as she adjusted the settings on her portable analyzer. "These symbols," she murmured, "they correspond to the acoustic anomalies we've been recording. It's as if this crypt was designed to capture and amplify the chants, to bind them here forever." Marcus studied the carvings, the realization settling like a stone in his gut. "A prison of sound," he said quietly. "A choir not of the living, but of the damned." Suddenly, a chill swept through the chamber, and a spectral figure materialized in the corner. Father Ambrose, the monastery's former abbot, appeared as a wraith-like silhouette draped in tattered robes. His hollow eyes reflected centuries of sorrow, his presence a silent admonition. Elena stepped forward, her voice barely more than a whisper. "He's here to warn us. To remind us of the cost the price paid for this eternal song." Jonas shifted uneasily, unwilling to acknowledge the apparition. Yet even he could not deny the oppressive weight of the moment. From a crumbling pedestal nearby, Elena retrieved a fragile manuscript, its pages yellowed and brittle. She began to read aloud, her tone trembling. The text spoke of other monasteries across distant mountains and forgotten valleys, each bound by similar dark pacts. The choir was no isolated phenomenon, but part of a vast network of spiritual corruption that had spread like a blight through the ages. Marcus exchanged a grim glance with Elena. "This isn't just a local curse, it's a legacy of damnation that stretches beyond this place." The chamber seemed to pulse in response, the choir's voices rising in a crescendo that filled every corner with a haunting resonance. As the echoes faded, the team stood in stunned silence, the weight of the discovery pressing down like the cold stone around them. The horror they faced was no longer confined to the monastery's walls. It was a sprawling, ancient evil, woven into the very fabric of faith and devotion, twisting hope into despair. Marcus closed his journal with a decisive snap. "We need to understand what we re-up against if we are to survive this choir. It's more than a haunting. It's a force, and it's far from done." Elena nodded, her eyes reflecting both fear and resolve. "And if this network is real, then our escape may only be the beginning of a larger nightmare." Jonas swallowed hard, the lines of his scowl softening momentarily as the enormity of their plight became undeniable. The choir's song resumed, weaving through the crypt like a living thing, a reminder that faith, when corrupted, could become a prison from which there was no release. Outside, the cold wind howled through the broken windows, carrying the hollow choir's eternal lament into the endless night. And somewhere deep within the shadows of the Alps, the echoes of damnation continued to grow.